All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to get started in just a minute. We want to give everyone a chance to wrap up their prior meeting and join us on this webinar today. So just sit tight and we will get started soon. Again, if you're just joining us, we're going to go ahead and get started in just a moment. We would just want to give everyone a chance to hop on here. So sit tight and we'll get started momentarily. Okay, we're now 1 minute past the hour. We're going to go ahead and get things started because we have tons of content to present in a 1 hour time period, and hopefully we'll get to it all in that time. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. If you're wondering if you're in the right place, this is the webinar for deploying to cloud-hosted Kubernetes environments with Terraform and Helm made easy. I'm Sean Pratt, your friendly product marketer here at JFrog. And I am joined by the one and only Roshan Kadsani. He's the star of the show, and he's going to take it from us in a minute. But before he gets started, a few things to note. This session is being recorded, and we will share it with you typically in 1 to 2 business days after we wrap up here today. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A tab. We'll be watching for both of those. If there are technical issues or anything like that, drop those in there and we'll take care of them. But we will have a few minutes for dedicated Q&A at the end. There's a lot of content to get through, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Roshan, who's going to take us away and introduce himself.
Thank you, Sean. Hey guys, this is Roshan. Thanks for joining, and thank you for taking this time out of the busy schedule to learn more about how we're able to deploy to a cloud-hosted Kubernetes environments with Terraform, Helm, and how JFrog can be like the center of pretty much all of this. And just a quick background on myself. I've been working with JFrog for a while, and I'm a senior solution engineer at JFrog. And prior to joining JFrog, I've been heavily working like hands-on on Kubernetes, cloud, containers, Terraform, pretty much the entire, whatever I can get hands-on the cloud native stack. So I'm happy to share a lot of information about it. So just to set a quick agenda for this today's session, we'll be quickly going over some of the introduction in terms of the different technologies that we're going to talk about today. There's a lot of stuff. And in terms of the current state and challenges of having all these different and trying to manage all of this different stuff just to get like from an application from your machine into the cloud, right? And also give you introduction on what the JFrog as a platform has to offer in this space. And we'll go through like an end-to-end demo while we're talking about this. And to also narrow down the scope, this is a 2-part series, right? This is the first part where we're solely focusing on managing the containerized application workflow. Like, for example, the Terraform that needs to provision your Kubernetes cluster to your Docker images, the Helm charts, the application repositories. So we'll be going through that. And also in terms of how we are able to provision Terraform, the cloud native Kubernetes environments through Terraforms. And also we'll quickly also go over JFrog pipelines itself, how the build happens and how we are able to do the deployment from there. And with that said, as Sean mentioned, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. This is going to be a super high level in terms of the technical details, but we'll be touching all the key aspects of it. So just to give an introduction for the containers itself, I know pretty much if you're here today, you definitely know there's something related to containers going on. And as per Gartner, like 90% of the global organizations will be running containers by 2027 in production. So there are a lot of companies already in running like full scale in productions, and also a lot of testing, development, a lot of stuff going on with the containers in their the non-production environments. And we just have to accept containers are the new normal, right? And now the challenge comes like, okay, there's containers that I have to deal with along with my application. And that's where Docker is there to help build this Docker image and help you run this as a containerized workload within any container platforms. And then we'll just go to the next stage, is that is Kubernetes, right? And Kubernetes here is essentially the second largest open source project in the world after Linux. So by this term itself, you would know how popular Kubernetes has been growing. Like the Cloud Native Foundation has noticed like, almost 1,000% increase from when Kubernetes has joined the CNCF to like 2023, right? And across the globe, it is being utilized. So now you're doing application management, you're doing Docker management. Now you have to think about, I need to also figure out a way how to run this particular container image in a Kubernetes environment, right? And then on top of it, there's Helm, right? It's not easy to manage like Kubernetes application deployment just with a single Docker, like single standalone, it works fine. But when you're dealing with multiple hundreds and thousands of microservices, Helm is there to help you manage your application and help you deploy it into your Kubernetes environment. And the Artifact Hub, from like, let's say just 1 year, it noticed like 200% increase in number of Helm packages that are getting published into the Artifact Hub. So if you notice, like all of these different cloud native packages, they're evolving heavily. And with that said, now comes Terraform, right? You've already figured out how you want to do your application. You already figured out how you want to bundle it. You already figured out where it has to run and how you'll be deploying it. And now you also have to think about managing or provisioning the infrastructure. So this covers pretty much like the dev side of it, the DevOps side of it, the SRE side of it. And when it comes to the management of the platform, I don't think there is no more popular tool out there, or an agnostic tool than Terraform that is helping you manage a lot of infrastructure as code with not just on cloud providers, but pretty much on premise everywhere. And as per Firefly, they did a study on the 2023 state of infrastructure as code. They found out that 90% of the cloud users are heavily relying on infrastructure as code. So now comes the challenge, right? Now you're actually needing repositories to manage your applications, not just like we have like hundreds of programming languages, right? Then you need a repository to manage all of these Docker images. You need to store it somewhere. You need to manage all those tags. And then you also need Helm to be stored somewhere. Right now, if you think that, okay, my application images will be in this repository, my Docker images will be in this container repository or registry, and my Helm charts will be in this blob, and my Terraform will be in this blob. So you already see that, for one single thing, you have to go and visit like multiple different steps. And that is where now comes, how do we actually address this? So we need a solution that can act as like a single source of truth, like putting everything in like one single source, so that you don't have to reach out to multiple places. and almost all of your production, all of your dev pretty much are relying on one single place. And that is where having a platform or a solution that can support a single source of truth and that can has the ability to scale to infinity, that is where this challenge can be addressed. And JFrog here today as a platform is able to and has been and is being able to act as like the trusted software delivery updates platform. Is essentially, if you look, JFrog Artifactory is the core of our entire DevSecOps platform. There are other capabilities in terms of security, the SCA, the SAST, curations, infrastructure as code scanning. So all those pieces will be definitely focusing on the second part of this webinar, but today will be primarily how you manage all of this stuff. And quickly going into the solution of the Artifactory, why we are saying this is because out of the box, we are able to support like 32 different types of packages, right from your application, right from your Docker repositories, Helm charts, we also help you with your Terraform. So if you look right from your application, right from your infrastructure as code, right from your release management, everything can be handled by one single solution. Isn't that nice to have managing less of actual architecture, actual environments to just one single platform as a SaaS. So this is a first step. Is essentially what we'll be doing is there are multiple steps in this. The first one I would actually wanted to talk through is essentially how we are able to manage the resources inside JFrog and also manage or provision your, the Kubernetes environments that are running on these public cloud environments to actually manage by Terraform. So essentially in this particular piece is, we're looking at, there are all these different repositories that you have to build even within JFrog's Artifactory. So we'll help automate all of that stuff with the Terraform while you're able to store all of these Terraform modules and also the state and everything within the JFrog platform itself. And how the Terraform that is used to actually build your, let's say in this particular webinar, I'll be going through an EKS cluster setup, right? And how I was able to actually store my state files within the JFrog platform. So with that said, let me just quickly go through what I have today here. So this is my IDE right now. I've just broken down these few main pieces. That is, I have my application, a Node.js application. Then I have a JFrog platform config. So when we are saying a platform config, right? So within Artifactory, there are like different repositories for different applications and different teams. And this is where, this is the JFrog platform itself. And within this, there are like different repositories, like for your Docker, for your Helm, for your NPM, and all this stuff. That is where we need to create all this stuff and manage it. This can be done all through the UI, but having this as config as a code is a huge advantage. And that is where you're having the different Terraform resources. JFrog actually published a whole lot of resources in terms of managing the Terraform resources, like Artifactory resources, that is example, like local repositories, remote repositories. I'll not jump into what they are, but essentially we'll be doing that configuration management. So if you look at this particular piece here, right? So I have my main.terraform file. And if you notice, I've been calling all these different modules from the main.terraform file. And ideally, when you call a module, you would call it from a Terraform registry. But here, what I'm doing is actually I'm calling all of these different modules from a local or from an Artifactory instance that I privately own. So if you notice, I've been able to publish my own Terraform modules into Artifactory, and I'm actually leveraging this as part of managing my own Artifactory instances. So for example, if I go into JFrog platform config, right, we have our main.tf, and we have different environment variables. And if you look at my backend, I have a backend configuration saying, hey, use this Artifactory instance as my backend config, so that whenever a state is being generated, you can actually, Artifactory is actually hosting that state for you. So with that said, if I do a TF init, and when I'm initializing, I'm basically telling the Terraform to use my Artifactory instance and also use this particular backend config. So when I do a Terraform initialize, is essentially it will initialize the backend, and also it will download all of these different modules, which basically, like, think of these are something that are internally that you built within your organization and you wanted to share with other teams. Like, let's say a networking team built all these modules, and there are other DevOps or SRE engineers who want to leverage these. So that is where this particular scenario would come into picture. And when I do a TF apply, is essentially what I'm doing is I'm passing my variable file, and I'm saying, hey, but before we apply a plan, there is the step to do a, sorry, before we apply the actual Terraform, there is a phase to actually do a plan to just to give an information of, hey, what is happening. But if you notice here, this particular Terraform is basically saying that it will provision all of these different repositories. For example, I have multiple local Docker repositories, multiple NPM repositories for my applications, and Helm repositories, and all those things like that. So that is where when I do a apply, so it's basically just going through the Terraform apply. And what is happening is all of these different repositories, I built these beforehand, but essentially all of these different repositories will be provisioned with an Artifactory. So you're actually configuring or managing all this config as state, so that all of the configuration as code. And now is essentially, you know, that all of these different changes are completed and you're good with all of your repository setup, right? And when we actually go to identify in terms of, okay, Roshan, you said that there is state that is being that is maintained, right? And this is a Terraform backend repository that is essentially helping you manage all of your states. So for this particular webinar, I had a state for this particular thing. And if you notice, here is a full information of the entire state and all of the different versions. So we ensure that, you know, it's not getting overwritten or things like that. So the full list of the state is there. So that is one piece of it. And the second piece to it is my EKS cluster that I wanted to provision. And let's go to the EKS itself, right? And from there, if you notice here, there is another repository or another folder for K8S TF. That is, I've broken down in terms of network. So basically, whatever the network resources that are needed to provision, like VPCs and all those things. So for that, I'm actually, what I'm doing here is essentially calling out or going through AWS to actually, so AWS provider to actually pull down all of these different resources. But if you notice, one thing is essentially within my, within the JFrog config itself is essentially, whenever I'm doing an initialize aspect of it, I'm providing where exactly the backend has to be initialized. And also one great part about this Artifactory is you'll have, you know, when you're dealing with different package types, you want to know how you want to get started, right? And that is where we give you a nice little set me up kind of capability where essentially you can do a Terraform login to this particular registry, and you can use this as within your configuration. So this will help you, create all of these different uh, directions where the push has to go, where do you have to resolve it. And also when I do, now let's go into the EKS piece of it, right? And when I do a Terraform EKS, what I do is Terraform initialize. And when I do a backend configuration, I just point to the same backend, but my workspace says, okay, this is only for EKS. So EKS will manage its own state. And also, if you notice, we pull down the AWS provider, right? So JFrog can also act as a proxy for pulling down any of like the providers, so that for, let's say, something happens to, the Terraform repository or registry out there, right? And you're not able to pull it down anymore. And that is where this remote repository concept comes into picture, is essentially I am pulling down this Terraform provider. So whenever any of my next TF initialize comes in, it doesn't have to go and reach out directly to the TF cloud, but essentially we are able to pull this provider from the Artifactory itself. So basically, you're storing your Terraform cloud. So basically, you're storing your Terraform state and also your providers and your modules, pretty much everything within the Artifactory itself. And going back is I already provisioned an EKS cluster for beforehand, just to, for the time purposes. And this is our EKS cluster. And if you notice right now, there is nothing running within this particular EKS cluster. So just jumping back, what we've got so far is we use Terraform to essentially manage all of the JFrog config in terms of repos, users, tokens, everything is pretty much managed. And in terms of the Kubernetes, we manage the AWS networking and EKS cluster provisioning, everything in terms of the repository management. Now let's actually jump into the second pieces of it. Is essentially the first step I want to do is JFrog to actually manage your Terraform. So if I go back into this particular Artifactory instance, so essentially here you have the capability to create, as I mentioned, the Terraform, the repository and the Terraform backend, right? And that's where what we've done is essentially, first piece is I want to create a remote repository for all of the things that are coming down from the Terraform registry. And if you notice, here is pretty much all of these different providers that we've been pulling. So I have JFrog providers, I have HashiCorp providers, I have AWS Terraform. So essentially, you're caching all of these within Artifactory. And the second piece to it is all of my all of the modules. So if you notice, so I built all of these different modules for managing your actual resources. So I want to have the capability to actually manage my own private modules. So that is where you are able to push it into a module repository as well. And that is where the local Terraform modules would come into picture. And if we go back, is now let's actually go into building our application itself, right? So for this particular demo purpose, what I did is I have a sample Node.js application, right? Within my Node.js application, I have my package .json, which has like pretty much a lot of information in terms of dependencies. And also, if you notice, I have a registry config where it says where I need to publish this particular NPM module. And going back to, if let's say we go back to Artifactory and say, okay, now I need a repository to actually store my NPM config or NPM modules. And that is where you're actually leveraging one of the local repository that is specific to NPM. And here, if you notice, in this, there's a nice little set me up functionality that comes with pretty much all of the packages. And this gives you information on all of the local config that you need to do in terms of, okay, just create a registry config within my local NPM and NPM login. So the credentials are there. And once you're ready to actually do any NPM publish, you can actually have this as part of your uh, npm package.json, and that's where I had. And when I do an npm publish into registry, it can actually publish that particular npm module. And once you have this particular module published, and this is where you can see in terms of like nice npm specific information, like all of the dependencies that are used to actually build this application, all of the dependencies that it went into it. So that's a nice little capability in terms of, what exactly is being as part of this particular package. And when it comes to the second piece, that is the Docker. So within the same application, now I know that, hey, this is an npm application. And if I go into my npm directory, or the Node.js one, I'll just quickly show in terms of, okay, I have my application. I just wanted to see how it's working. So right now, this application is a simple um, Node.js app that does, like, just get some kind of information in terms of host name, in terms of architecture, things like that. Just nothing fancy, just simple application. Now, I just want to actually bundle this Docker image. And for Docker image as well, there are different repositories within the Docker. So for example, there is a repository that you can create that is only specific for your dev kind of images, right? And if you go back and I do a Docker login to just say, hey, this is my, oh, sorry, I'll just log in against a different environment. So essentially, you're authenticating your local Docker client to this. And when you do a Docker build, uh, is you're essentially running a Docker build with, so basically you're tagging this particular Docker image with where exactly you want to push it to. And once you do a Docker build, is essentially it will just go ahead and pull down the Docker image. So if you notice, I'm using an Alpine 18 node version of the image for as my base. And that is where also the base images are getting cached within Artifactory. So I have a proxy to the Docker Hub, and essentially all of the requests that are going to Docker Hub is going through Artifactory. So all of your Docker images, the base layers are getting cached. So any request that comes in, it gets here, and you can do a Docker push from here as well, ensuring there is a Docker uh, commit that you're doing from your local environments uh, to Artifactory. This can be done as well. So now what we did is essentially we managed Terraform resources within JFrog. And now we also did a Docker, uh, we also did NPM, by the way, managed within JFrog. Then we did the Docker repository. So if you notice within the Docker repository, the image that we just pushed is essentially should be part of the latest tag. And here you notice like all of the different information in terms of the Docker. So for example, hey, this is a port, and these are all the different layers within my Docker image, and these are the different shards, the entire manifest, pretty much everything is there within Artifactory. And now I actually wanted to do is use Artifactory as my Helm repository, right? And for that as well, JFrog Artifactory is essentially has a capability to uh, become your Helm chart repository as well. So this is one of the local Helm chart repositories that I created. And if you notice, I already published a Helm chart to this particular repository. And if we notice here, is essentially I have the different charts for building my application. And this is super simple as well in terms of I have a deployment for my Kubernetes. I have the providing the values in terms of where exactly I need to pull this particular image. And there is a simple service that basically helps with the service discovery for the two different parts. And this is the my chart.yaml, where essentially I'm saying, hey, this is my chart. This is the basic information needed for my chart. And let's say is, well, let's try to just take a moment and actually do like a chart. And just before I do is essentially wanted to also do a quick set me up here is within this particular capability as well is, so let me select the Helm here. We'll just go back, just click a refresh. And this gives you a nice little capability to actually do a quick set me up so that you are able to also configure your local environments, because you don't want to keep scrambling, where exactly I need to find my configuration that I needed to push, all that stuff. So if I just go here, is essentially this is the helper command that will help you to add this particular repository or the Helm chart to your local repo list. So if I do a Helm repo add, I'm just specifying this information. And because this already exists, it's just saying that. And when I do a Helm repo list, is essentially these are all of the local Helm repos that I have within my local client. And if, for example, I just wanted to search in terms of, um, you know, trying to search what are all the available charts. Right now, this is one of the chart that is available within this particular Helm repository. What we'll do is essentially within this chart, we'll just change, let's say the version of our application, let's say 2.0, right? And here within this particular application, what I'm doing is um, Helm package. Let me do this. I'll just go into the charts folder itself, and then I'll just run a Helm package. What is essentially doing is it's just packaging or creating a tar file or tar ball of this particular chart version. And now what you can do is do a call to actually upload this particular chart to Artifactory. And by just doing this step, you just specify the file, the tar file name itself, and where exactly you wanted to push it to. And this can be as part of your CI or CD pipeline as well, essentially automatically generating the chart for you. So now if you notice, going back to this Helm repository, you should be able to see our version 2.0. And this is our version 2.0 of the application. And even in this chart, because of the native repository type, you are able to extract a lot of information related to the charts in terms of, what is the version, what is the application version, who is the maintainer. And also you'll be able to see in terms of the templates and things like that. So now, if for an example or for an end user, right, you already publish it and your customers wanted to download this Helm chart, right? And me as a customer, what I can do is I can do the same Helm repo add. Once I add the repository, I can do a Helm repo update. So essentially, it is updating all of my local repositories or Helm repositories to see if there's any new available charts out there. And when I do a Helm search, we should be able to find the latest one. So if you notice, so we already have, this is our Helm chart that we just published. And as an end user, I'm able to already consume it. And from this moment, it's more of actually how you actually deploy it. So just going back here is essentially, we did Terraform, we did Docker, we did Helm. And these are all the stuff we did. So we manage the Terraform module repositories. We manage Terraform provider repositories. Uh, we also manage the Terraform backend, that is the state of your infrastructure. Like typically, you either store it in like a blob or things like that, but your state, all the different stuff are in one single source. And then with the Docker, it's the standard Docker registry. So we do support uh, the native Docker registry, and also we are soon providing native Helm OCI compliant repositories for Helm, and also your Docker images, so that you can do OCI compliant images hosted within the Artifactory itself. And then finally, the Helm repositories for all of your Helm charts. So if you see now, actually, what we can do is, one thing I also wanted to touch is, we did a lot of manual steps, right? We did from manually, you know, pulling down, building, publishing, all that stuff. So in an automated world, or in an DevOps CI/CD fashion, what it would look like is essentially you could automate all of these steps essentially through your own the JFrog, your own CI/CD tools. But we also have our own CI/CD service that is called JFrog Pipelines. Essentially, this is all part of your platform itself. And within my pipelines, before I actually jump into a few of the things, within my Git repository where I have my application code, I have the JFrog's pipeline. So pretty much the entire pipeline is also as code. So we're also doing a version control of your pipeline. So I've just created a different resources saying, hey, this is my Git repository, and I want this pipeline to get triggered on every commit or every pull request. And when it comes to your pipeline itself, we're saying, hey, use this Artifactory instance, push it out to this repository. All of that configuration is pretty much done in all of these in these different steps. So now let's actually go into the JFrog pipelines itself. And within the JFrog pipelines is essentially, first we need to create a pipeline source. And within the pipeline source is you can specify where exactly that YAML file is. So within the Git repositories, you can specify, you're actually doing an integration with your source code management. Right now, my code is in the GitHub. So I had an integration with the GitHub just so it can grab all of the repositories that have in my own account, and I'll be able to grab the source of my pipeline code. And that is where it is just verifying if that pipeline code is validated. It's doing a semantic validation, and also, in terms of ensuring syntactically it is correct or not correct. And once you do this, there are certain steps that you need to do. Is essentially, these are the pipeline integrations in terms of, hey, this is my repository for the pipeline, or the Git repository, and this is my Artifactory instance. This is my Docker registry where you need to pull the Docker image or push the Docker image. Once you've defined this, and it is pretty much actually jumping into the pipeline itself. So I'll just quickly show, for example, let's do Git status. We just modify our charts. So we'll just do and let's do a commit. Version 2.0.0, right? And now when I do a git push, right, what essentially should happen is my pipeline should notice there is a change within the Git repository, and the pipeline should start working its way. So if you notice, I've already had few things that were already done, and essentially these are like the different steps in terms of, okay, I need to grab the application version, doing my npm build, docker build, and also doing some kind of scans. But essentially, if you look at like the high level is, you know, we're doing an npm build, doing a Docker build, pushing it to a Docker repository, and then we're actually promoting it instead of actually rebuilding through different phases of your SDLC. Typically, it would be like some automated testing that happens between each of the stage. So, for example, in the dev push, once it happens, you're doing the build information getting published into Artifactory. You're doing actually promoting this particular one to the different stages, and finally there should be a production image that is being pushed into Artifactory. So uh, if you notice, that is where all of the pipelines should be working. And essentially, you should be noticing that the image or the Docker application that we just built is getting promoted to like the different versions from your dev repositories to your test repositories to your production repositories, so that at the end, this is your final and this is your chart, and this is where I need to deploy my application. And let's quickly actually, jump back into our Kubernetes itself. So I already have a Kubernetes cluster up and running. That is, we use that Terraform script to provision our EKS cluster. So if you notice, this is our EKS cluster that is up and running, and we don't have any application that is running as of now, right? And this could be the CD piece of it, which could be automated through the pipelines. But just for the demo purpose, I'm just going through actually pulling down the Helm chart that we already did and actually apply that Helm chart. So if I do a kubectl get ns, so these are the namespaces. Uh, Perfect. So this is the namespaces, and then kubectl get po. If you notice, same thing, we should not have any pods that are running as of now. And let's do a Helm install actually. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying do a Helm install, and this is my release name, and this is the chart that you need to use for the deployment. And let me do a dry run. Is essentially just wanted to see what exactly would so the Helm is checking if that particular release is deployed or not. And then it'll try to do an installation. And we are running this in a dry run mode right now. So if you notice, the app already, the chart is there available with my service, with my deployment.yaml. And now I actually will and also, if you notice in the Helm chart, we are saying that just pull the Docker image uh, from the registry that we just published, right? And now I'll do the Helm uh, upgrade and install, and I'll just remove the dry run. And now you're actually able to notice that this Helm chart is actually getting installed within the Kubernetes cluster that we just provisioned, which is all built by the Terraform that is already being managed within Artifactory. So while we are waiting on this particular release to happen, it just did. So we'll just do kubectl get PO. You should notice that both of the pods are up and running. And so going back to our Kubernetes cluster, we should also notice that pods are actually running within the environment. So I'll just do a quick refresh. And this was the pod that is running. And we know that it has successfully pulled the image from the our environment. This is the Artifactory SaaS environment, which I just spin up. It took like 5 minutes for me to just have this environment up and running. It's that easy. So this is what we looked at. So if we just try to summarize in terms of like the end-to-end flow, that what we just did is essentially as a developer, right? I used an NPM application and I resolved all of those dependencies through Artifactory. And I also had all of these public dependencies that I need to resolve. So if you notice within the package.json, I have all of the Express, cookie parser, EJS, all of these different stuff that I needed to resolve. And Artifactory helped me proxy and help me resolve all of these dependencies. And within my version control system, I actually committed the code. We did a small change. We did the commit, and then when we look at the CI server, that is the JFrog pipelines actually pulled the code, and then it did a npm build, and then also a Docker build. So it also needed to resolve certain dependencies, and for that, it actually referred to Artifactory to resolve. So essentially, because all of my application repositories are still here in the Artifactory, right? And then we also publish those particular Docker images and npm modules to Artifactory. And finally, we also pulled our Helm chart. I know this would be a CD aspect of it, but we pulled down the Helm chart. We deployed it into our Kubernetes, our cluster, that is our production environment. So if you notice, right from the development to the production, different packages in terms of npm, Helm, Docker, and Terraform, everything is being stored in one single source, and that is where we are able to solve, like, getting away with managing different repositories or different sources for all of these different packages. And with that said, I know there's a few more minutes left on the webinar time here, but so would actually be open to taking up questions, uh, and we'll just also have a few more things that I would like to cover.
Awesome. Thanks, Roshan. That was very fast. I know you went super fast to give us some time for questions. And we have had a couple come through, but for me, I think it's incredible that you showed how you were able to, provision a Kubernetes environment, build an application, publish the application to the Kubernetes environment, and get all that running using Artifactory as our single source of truth, not needing to worry about managing other tools, other systems, and really streamline this kind of modern cloud native development process using JFrog. So that was really cool to see. So a couple of questions that we had that came through. The first one was, obviously you showed Docker, but does Artifactory support other container formats?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sean. Yes, in terms of the repository types, as we mentioned, yes, the native Docker repositories are supported, along with there will be soon support for, I mean, today you're already able to store OCI compliant Docker images or OCI container images. And if you're doing like multi-architecture in terms of ARM-based or other architecture types, all of those are able to be hosted within Artifactory. Docker repositories.
Awesome. So your Docker images and your OCI images can all be stored within Docker repositories today. And we're going to have full native support for OCI images and compliant images and compliant Helm
Yeah.
as well soon, very
Yes.
soon, actually.
That's an exciting thing. I know Helm just announced it, but we already are jumping onto it, and we'll be able to have native Helm repositories, which are OCI compliant.
Awesome. Second question for you was on the Terraform bit. You showed modules, providers, state files. I think it's worth clarifying. So you can store and manage modules and state files in Artifactory. Are they stored in separate places? Can you explain a little bit how that works?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. I know, when we say Terraform, there's a lot of pieces to it, right? So essentially, let's start from the first phase itself, right? So for when you're building your Terraform, you need certain providers, right? You need certain providers in terms of these could be cloud providers or any resources. Like for example, JFrog is also a provider, right? And you can create a Terraform registry, which can actually proxy all of these requests so that all of the providers are getting cached. And second piece is one thing that I also mentioned during our webinar is there are all of these local modules that I as a internal employee trying to build all these different modules, and then probably another team wants to consume it, and that is where these Terraform modules can also be created and actually published within your own internal Artifactory instances. So you have a space for your providers, you have a space for your modules, and when it actually comes to actually provisioning and storing a state of artifact of the Terraform, we have a backend or a native repository type called Terraform backend, which is primarily focusing on uh, hosting the state files of of your infrastructure. So it's covering pretty much all of the spaces in terms of Terraform.
And that backend state file support, that includes things like diff and user access controls and all the things that you really need to manage state files, correct?
Yeah, essentially, a challenge that comes usually with managing state is you wanted to ensure that, like, let's say, Sean, you've been working on this Terraform, and then you're making those changes. But I, Roshan, come into picture and say, hey, I want to make some changes too, right? And we're overriding the same state file, right? And with having these different versions within Artifactory, it actually manages that state locking capabilities so that because of these different versions, you're not actually causing any problems to the main state file or the creating like there's multiple copies or multiple writes happening at the same time.
Awesome. Great. That's super useful for folks that are using Terraform for sure. One other question that came in, Roshan, is it possible to share the resources? And I'm assuming that means some of the resources that you use to build or set up these things. I know we've got documentation. What do you think the answer to that is?
Yeah, I mean, me from an engineering and being an open source enthusiast, yeah, I definitely wanted to publish these stuff out so that whoever is attending our webinars can actually try to do some kind of hands-on, get this working. So I have created these particular different folders. So for example, I'll probably do a nice little polish of having nice README instructions in terms of how to do it. So this will definitely have that, like the base Docker image or the sample Node.js application, some of the Terraform configs, and also like the EKS. So I'll be able to publish out. We'll just have to work around the how we wanted to, give it out or put it in some channel out there. But Sean, I think that is a really great question. And Melissa did say that in terms of GitHub,
GitHub, yeah.
we'll definitely be able to push it out there and share it. But Sean, as we were discussing, right, this is such a small short window to actually dig deep into a lot of these different areas, right? We actually wanted to see, like, if get a feedback from you is essentially if you wanted to have this like a hands-on workshop kind of session where we can go uh, help you also set up few things. We will definitely open to feedback. Right, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if this, Melissa or others on the webinar, if this is interesting to you and you want more hands-on learning on this particular topic around, managing cloud native workflows with JFrog, let us know and we're happy to put that together for you guys. Obviously, the next webinar, we're going to touch on the security aspect, securing those workflows. But let us know what you'd like to see and we're happy for you. Roshan flashed very briefly there. If you're not a JFrog user today, you can sign up for a trial and start playing with this stuff. And we'll include that link in the follow-up emails that we send, as well as the link to register if you haven't done so already for the next session we're having next week on the security practices.
Yeah, and that's a great next step from here is essentially, we're building all this, but in our second part, we'll be heavily focusing on how security comes into all of these different aspects in terms of how you're able to secure your container images, your Terraform resources, identifying vulnerabilities in the application that you build. So how you can strengthen that end to end from the dev to your release. So that is the main focus of the second part of this particular webinar that is going to happen on September 28th. We'll be sending out probably another email just to remind about the second webinar. But this concludes my presentation here. And thank you so much for, patiently listening through all of this. Happy to get feedback from your end.
Awesome. Thanks, Roshan, and thanks everyone for joining. We hope to see you next week and have a great rest of your day.